Hey there guys, welcome back to a brand new YouTube video where today we're going to be talking about my most recent investment, the Canon 6D Mark I. If you know me personally or keep up to date with what I post on Instagram and YouTube, you'll probably know that for a long time now I've been shooting with a Canon 5D Mark I. It's a great camera, but I really felt like I could upgrade and get something better just for the low ISO performance, and the autofocus performance on the 5D Mark I wasn't too great. So I decided to up my game and get a Canon 6D Mark I. So what I'm going to do with this video is I'm going to split it into two halves. We're going to have the Pro, so I'm going to talk about a lot of that for a bit, and then we're going to move into some of the cons and things I don't like about this camera. So let's quickly run through some of the spec of this camera. It's got a 20.2 megapixel full frame sensor. It's got the Canon EF mount, so any lenses you put on it are going to be directly native to that focal length. So if you put a 50mm on it, it'll be 50mm, which is really nice. It's got a standard ISO range of 100 to 25,600. That's expandable to 50 to about 104,200, I believe. It shoots 4.5 frames per second, which is not great, but it's reasonably fast, which is okay. And it's also got a silent shutter mode, and I say silent because it's not completely silent, but it's still much better than the usual loud clap, mirror clap that you would get if you didn't have it on. Just for comparison, I'll just show you it now. So this is the standard shutter sound. Put it closer to the mic. And then if we stick it on silent, so you can tell it's a little bit longer, but obviously it's much more quiet. And I've actually turned off the autofocus beep as well, because if you turn off the autofocus beep and then have it on silent, it's a really nice pairing for events. Usually when it's quite loud as well, people really won't be able to hear you taking photos, whereas with the 5D it was just like a ridiculously loud clap that anyone within about a 10-meter radius could hear you. So having that silent shutter function is a massive plus on the 6D. As far as the build quality goes, it's just the same as you'd expect from any other Canon full-frame DSLR. The only difference it's got from the 5D series is that the top plate is polycarbonate plastic, which is basically so that the Wi-Fi and GPS functions can just go straight through the top of the body. And what I really like about it is the fact that it actually makes it more lightweight. So one of the things that I didn't like about the 5D Mark I is because it was just like built like an absolute tank. I did feel like with the battery grip it was quite a heavy load to be carrying around all the time. So the 6D Mark I without a battery grip is a really good travel companion as far as full frame DSLRs go. Which I really appreciated when I was traveling around on holiday carrying this all day. As far as video codecs go, it shoots in the standard IPB codec that you can find on most other Canon cameras, but fortunately you can also record in the All-I codec, which is a much less compressed version of 1080p. It doesn't do 4K or anything like that, it's just standard 1080p, but I really like the All-I codec. I actually shot a music video with this camera last week in the All-I codec and then exported it up into 4K, and it turned out really nice. So having the IPV codec is a really nice option to have, especially for proper video productions and things like that, especially when you can export it and upscale it into 4K. Another one of the massive things that I liked about this camera is that because I'm a pure Canon shooter, I'm familiar with the EF mount system. I've got all EF mount lenses. I'm familiar with how Canon's cameras work and all their little quirks. So as soon as I picked up this camera, I felt right at home, and it was a really nice, easy shooting experience because it just felt like something that was very natural and something that I'd used before, essentially. It's where I've come from, sort of relatively new crop sensor systems and old full frame systems. This sort of feels like a full frame system with the crop sensor menus, which I quite like. So it's sort of a blend of the 5D Mark I and the 200D minus the dual pixel autofocus system, which it doesn't have. Another thing that I found really cool about this camera is the fact that the All-I codec isn't actually on the 6D Mark II. So if you get the 6D Mark II, you won't have that codec. It's only on the 6D Mark I and a lot of the other Canon cameras, which I really like, and it's especially useful for video productions. So that All-I codec is really good for video, and obviously with that full frame sensor you can get quite a good low light performance. I know the 6D Mark II obviously has the vari-angle screen and dual pixel autofocus and 60 frames per second video and all that, but if you're shooting just for 24 frames and want something really cinematic and high quality, you're going to get better quality video out of the 6D Mark I. Which I quite like. So moving into the cons of this camera, because obviously no camera is perfect, and you know, you've got to work around some things, and here's a list of the things that I am obviously having to work around with this camera despite all of its good points. So the first one is the fact that it only has an 11-point autofocus system, which means that it's not brilliant for sports photography. If you're trying to capture anything moving really fast and need that really snappy autofocus, you're not going to get that. Although the autofocusing system is pretty good, it holds up in most situations. Obviously it doesn't have that dual pixel autofocus, and especially if you're trying to do autofocus in video, you're not going to get great results of that because you don't have that dual pixel autofocus system. So autofocusing in video is pretty much a no-no. There is a lot of things you do have to work around this camera for video production. Also the fact that it doesn't have a vari-angle screen and it's not touchscreen either. Luckily I have a Fieldworld MA5 monitor, which means that obviously I can use focus peaking and magnification to check my focus and things like that. So it's luckily that monitor does sort out a lot of the problems that I have, but this isn't sort of, I wouldn't use this camera for vlogging because I can't see myself, and the autofocus system just really isn't reliable enough for me to want to do that like the 200D is. But if you're using an external monitor and you're really taking your time with what you're doing, you can really get some really fantastic results with video on this camera. In terms of weather sealing, I'm not 100% sure on this because I've done some research and there's people umming and ahhing whether the 6D is actually weather sealed. I've seen a lot of people on forums saying that it's weather resistant but not sealed. I'm a bit reluctant to obviously test that out because I'm always careful with my equipment. I don't tend to break anything or subject it to really dangerous use or anything like that, so I think I'll just keep it protected. But I think it's just safe to assume that it's weather resistant instead of sealed, just so that I don't damage it or anything like that. Canon says that it is weather sealed, but I'm just a bit cautious, if that makes sense. Obviously it's like a very small gripe, but it's probably just me who's noticing this. The wheel on the 5D Mark I is much larger and it's easier to turn, whereas on the 6D Mark I, there's like a D-pad in the middle of the wheel and it's not as big, which means that my finger rubs up against the grip sometimes, which is a little bit annoying. I will get used to it obviously, but that's just like a little gripe that I've had with it, but I'm sure I'll work around that. I'll forget it really quickly. And one of the things that annoys me the most about this camera is something I really just can't understand, because they could have so easily fixed it, is the fact that when you shoot in live view, it doesn't give you an accurate readout of your exposure. So when you're shooting in live view, the camera will show you what it thinks it's going to be exposed like. So say, for example, if I'm deliberately underexposing an image, the exposure won't change according to my settings. It will just do its own thing. Whereas on the 200D, if I'm shooting in live view, I can see exactly how bright an image is going to be and what sort of exposure I'm going to get. Whereas I don't get that on the 6D Mark I, which is slightly annoying. And you also don't get the focus magnification, whereas on the 200D where you can double press the zooming button and check your focus, I don't get this on the 6D Mark I, which is quite frustrating. But again, that's just one of the many workarounds that you have to put up with. Going back to the pros of this camera, I really like the ability to back button focus. Obviously I've never had that before. The 200D doesn't do it and the 5D Mark I doesn't do it as far as I know, don't quote me on that. But the ability to back button focus with the AF on button is actually really useful, especially if you really want to be precise with your focusing, which I've really been liking, and it's actually transformed the way I sort of focus my images now, which is really cool. Overall, I'm really pleased with this camera, and for a price of $515, which is what I got it for, I think it was an absolute steal, because it only had 8,000 shutter actuations before I bought it, and it basically came in brand new condition. Which obviously I was really excited about because it was basically a brand new full frame DSLR that was somewhat modern in comparison to the 5D Mark I, which is obviously somewhat primitive in terms of nowadays cameras. In terms of who I think this camera is aimed at, I think it's sort of aimed at enthusiasts to an intermediate level photographers and filmmakers. Obviously it's not completely specced out like an EOS R or the 1DX Mark II or the 5D Mark IV or anything like that, but it definitely comes with some features that if you're willing to work around, you can create some really great stuff. I'll actually link the music video that I shot in the description if you do want to go and check that out. I shot that all completely on the 6D Mark I, 35mm cine lens and the Fieldworld Master MA5 monitor at the back of an Uber in London, so you can go and check that out if you want. I will also be making a how I shot it series on future projects that I make, starting with that music video that I shot, so do look out for that over the next coming weeks or days. That should be cool. And overall, I'm really happy with this camera. I would highly recommend it to anyone who's still shooting on crop sensor and wants a pretty good camera that just works in the full frame realm, if that makes sense. and yeah, definitely a workhorse, so we'll be using it for many years to come. So if you have enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe, it does help me out. And if you've got any questions for me or feel like I've missed anything out, just pop that down in the comment section below and I'll get right back to you, as I'd love to answer your questions. And until the next time, I've been Harry.